everyone, this is Mayor Mike, and we're here with a special edition of Talking Point. I'm here now with Director Scott Beduhn. Director, I wanted to talk a little bit about, well, Business 51 and our transportation projects in general, because there's a lot of misinformation flying around out there. First of all, I want you, citizens, to know that regardless of how things fall out on August 10th, you will still have potholes. That's not going away, ever. It's just a fact of life. Taxes will likely not go down. I don't recall our taxes ever going down. Services cost more. Employees cost more. We're talking transportation projects in general are going up 20, 30, 40%. So it seems very unlikely that whatever happens, taxes will go down. Business 51 is not going away. So it's going to be here forever. It's simply not going away in any way, shape, or form. And most importantly, whatever happens, we don't know if it's going to be a 3-lane or a 4-lane or a 6-lane or a cow path when this is all said and done. It doesn't matter what really happens there on August 10th. So let's talk a little bit about our transportation needs, what transportation encompasses, and how much we spend on it every single year.
Those are very good questions.
So let's start with potholes, right?
Sure.
We have a budget for road surface improvements. And we run that through our capital budget. And about what do we spend a year?
Our budget is roughly $750,000 every year.
And that's just for fixing holes and cracks.
That is correct, just the general maintenance and upkeep of our roads.
So now we've done a pretty good job of becoming more efficient. That infrared patcher is doing a heck of a job. As a matter of fact, there was the asphalt was buckling a little bit, I understand, near the roundabout on the north end of Business 51. Mm-hmm. And Luke mentioned that they're going to take the patcher out there and see if they can fix that. How has that been working from your perspective?
The patcher's been working great. It's definitely one of the newer technologies, and we're always looking for more. What can we do? Definitely in efficiency. We can utilize and even recycle the existing asphalt there versus removing it at additional cost. It's a small crew versus bringing in a large paving crew that might others have to deal with it. And we can definitely make a more permanent type repair than just filling in potholes like we used to.
Sure. And the road surface improvements are just one of them. That's kind of a maintenance issue where every city's got to deal with it, and you do that to preserve the life of the road. We've got a little over 150 miles of road in the city, and we budget for road rebuilds every year. You're working up on the north side a lot this year, and we've got some plans for next year already. Tell me about that. What's the process that we go through to determine when a road needs to be fully replaced? We can't patch it anymore. We got to do something.
Right, and that's usually the first thing we get to is when is it no longer cost effective to maintain that road? And we realize that the money we're spending isn't really the best use of the dollars that we have. So that starts to trigger it, and we hope to get there before that happens to identify that it's going to be there soon. And so we identify those. Part of it is, every other year we're required by the state to do what's called a PACER rating, and that is a universal rating system that every local unit of government uses, so we're all using the same means to do that, especially when it comes to state aids and such. But we utilize that information as just one of the components that we otherwise try to do that, to make the decisions. It also has to do with ADA compliance of sidewalks. It has to do with the utilities that are buried beneath the road, which may also
be. Some of those date back to the Roman aqueducts.
It seems like they're about that old, yes. So we're trying to look at all those things. We'll even look at things that others might not consider. We'll talk to our forester about tree health within certain areas, or those sorts of issues too. And we try to put that all together and identify where are we going to utilize our money most effectively across a broad spectrum of things, not just the road service as well, although that's usually the leading component of it.
So give me an idea of what we spend on a capital budget annually on planned road repairs or road replacements.
Yeah, what we've otherwise been spending in the last few years, we have 2 major projects every year. One is in conjunction with the utility department, where we do a complete reconstruction, including those utility replacements. The city's component of that is usually in the $2 million range and up. And then we also do a resurfacing project, which is usually somewhere in that $1 million or so range and up from there. All told, I'd say at averaging over the years between the two, they vary in size. About $3.5 million is what our budget is annually.
Okay, now for those of us who don't know, Tell me what the difference is between a replacement and a resurfacing.
Sure, that's a very good question. And oftentimes people don't understand the difference. And really, the biggest difference, as we take it, and others may use a slightly different definition of what it is, but for practical purposes here in the city, a resurfacing, and reconstruction, we're tearing the road completely down to basically the native soils beneath it and rebuilding that, oftentimes in conjunction with the utility replacement. Also taking out curb, gutter, sidewalk, basically everything to the right of way. So it's very intensive, very disruptive to people's lives, unfortunately, but necessary.
I'm on the north side.
To keep, to do that, because every component of that roadway needs to be considered in that replacement. We can't simply just do part of it without necessarily doing all of it, especially when you start to incorporate utilities. A resurfacing, on the other hand, can vary in complexity depending upon the age and condition of the road. And its simplest, we're simply just removing the asphalt on top of it and replacing it. Slightly more complicated, that we may take some of the gravel beneath it to build up a little bit more of that base. We might go down to the soil and then just build up a little bit more, so we get more life out of the road. But that's on a case-by-case basis, and that's the general difference between it. Resurfacing is really just the pavement component of it.
Right, and I'm gonna take the reins a little bit just to explain a few other things that people may not know. The reason we work in conjunction with the utilities is because the stuff under the road is in some cases more important than what's above the surface or on the surface of the road. So we've got some areas of the city that have very old utilities, very subjective to decay and cracking and leaks. And if we just rebuild the top of the road without paying attention to those utilities underneath, we could put a new road on, and 6 months later, when winter rolls around, a pipe cracks and we have a leak. So we have to cut a hole in the new road, dig it out, and put a patch in for that pipe. Then 6 months later, the next piece down the road might crack and we have to cut a patch out. And you've seen this on some of your city streets where you have a big section of what looks like new asphalt. Those are generally because something had to be repaired or replaced on the utilities underneath. So when we work in conjunction with the utilities department, that's water, wastewater, and stormwater. And in some cases, in almost all cases, we work with the other utilities that are there, cable, phone, things like that.
Yep. WPS, the gas,
right? The gas lines.
Absolutely.
All of those things are within the right of way of the road. Now, they may not be under the road, they may be under the sidewalk or the boulevard, but we have to work with all of those parties to make sure that we're not tearing this stuff up again in 6 months. So that's why we work on a rebuild. We use the utilities as part of the equation, because we certainly don't want to put a new road down and then have to tear things up later, 6 months down the road or whatever. A resurfacing is really just kind of part of the life cycle of a road. And you and I had talked about this. So a brand new road still requires maintenance. And you do chip sealing, you do crack filling, and all of this is kind of on a schedule over the years, depending on how old it is.
That's correct.
Resurfacing is just part
One
of that.
One of those tools, yes, because the road itself is much more than the asphalt. But at some point in time, the asphalt needs to be replaced, while the road, the remainder of it, is sufficient.
Right. So it's really almost like a facelift, I suppose.
Absolutely,
if you will.
yes.
Get a few more years out of it. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the PACER system, because we use the phrase a lot. It's an acronym, and I don't even know what the acronym stands for. I'm not going to put you on the spot, so we'll just say it's an acronym for something, pavement something, and I bet the last one is rating.
It is rating, yeah.
So what it is it's kind of like a sonar. So the trucks drive around and shoot waves down into the surface below, and it gives you an idea of the condition of the subsurface based on the result of the sonar. Just like you would in a boat when you're fishing, your fish locator goes down and you see the things on the bottom. This gives you an idea of what the subsurface of the road looks like. And the scale is from a 1 to a 10. Now, I'm going to ask you, the road, a brand new road is what?
A brand new road is considered a 10.
Okay.
And I guess just a little bit more on that, as you're otherwise saying, is the ratings is oftentimes, can be very simple in that, because it's really looking at the distresses at the surface and identifying what the causes are. They're usually underlying that. So really it's one of those things that whether you're a large metropolitan area like Madison, Milwaukee, and you might have a staff much larger than Stevens Point, or you're a small township that has a fraction of even what we have. Everybody can do something relative to that using the PACER system while coming up with relatively similar results in the end.
What my point was is I wanted to have you tell our watchers and listeners, what's the average PACER rating of any
yes.
road? On those 150 miles of road, what's average?
The average that we always have, I guess you can look at it in two different ways. We do look at just the average of roads is a little over a 5 for us,
Okay.
which means that we have 10s, and we have 9s, and we have, of course, 5s. We also have 3s and 2s.
And 1 is basically a cow
And
path.
1. And they do vary a little bit depending upon the actual material type. So a concrete rating is a little bit different because its distresses are different than asphalt pavement, but most of our roads are asphalt. And speaking specifically to asphalt, a rating of 1 is going to be very similar, quite honestly, to what a gravel road would be. You know, the asphalt is dry and brittle and it's broken apart, and really you're just left with the aggregate at that point in time.
And you can't even patch something like that.
Right, no, there's really not much that you can do with that at that point in time. But yet, you know, there's often enough binder holding it together that it may not be as bad as you sound. You know, it sounds like, oh my gosh, gravel road. But the reality is that, you know, that's really the end of the life. And we try to capture it, if best we can, like really just before that happens on many of our local roads, because, you know, even at a 2, it may not look pretty, but it's usually still very functional.
And, you know, there's municipalities very near to us that have it a lot worse than us. I hear this all the time about how bad our roads are. But what you're telling me is that about half of our roads are below average. The average is kind of middle of the road, no pun intended, but half of our roads are 5 or below.
Correct.
So, you know, it's important to know that that's a big issue, and the road in front of your house might be a 4, but the road in front of my house is a 2. I get priority if that's the way we choose, and you may have to wait a few years to get your road, you know, resurfaced or fixed, whether it's a rebuild or just, you know, maybe a quick patching job.
Oh, absolutely.
We try and patch as best we can, but at some point you're really just kind of, you know, beating a dead horse there, or whatever you want to call it, because it's not going to do you that much good. Now, let's get to something that's a little relevant. What's the average PACER rating on, let's say, Business 51?
Well, it varies a little bit. I forget what the average actually is, because it does vary.
Yeah, it's a long road.
Across, you know, throughout there, yes, it's a, you know, about a 3-mile stretch, and it's as low as 3, as I recall, and as high as 7, I believe, excluding the roundabout, which is relatively new.
Okay, so
overall,
not terrible.
It's in that 4 or 5 range.
So the reason this came up was it's in that range. We need to be thinking about rebuilding it. And I know we talked about this, you know, a decade ago when Andrew Halverson was mayor, because it needed to be on the radar. Like you just said, our capital budget is planned 5 years or more out. So we have a good understanding of which roads are going to get done approximately which year. We don't like pull names out of a hat to see which road we're going to do next year. We plan. And part of the plan is the 51 is going to need to be rebuilt.
Right, absolutely, and part of that is, as you're, you know, saying, is trying to plan ahead from there. There's a lot of information that kind of leads us empirically to like where a road is at a certain PACER rating, potentially how much life it might have. And there are a lot of other variables that go into it, but understanding our roads and seeing where they otherwise are going, yes, I mean, that portion of the road, which is a 3 today, will probably quickly get to the 2 and 1 stage there, because at the end of its useful life, they tend to increase, you know, more dramatically and start to fail sooner. So while it may be a 5 for a decade, 2 decades, like that, at a 3, it may only take a decade to become a 2.
Right.
And, you know, and in a project, especially something like that, it takes a fair amount of time to do the planning and the design for it. So we can't wait for it to fail and be reactive to it. We definitely have to be proactive.
You know, and really a lot of this stems from an incident back in 2005. The State Department of Transportation had jurisdiction over all of Business 51, from, you know, the north side of Point to the south side of Plover, and they came to each of the municipalities in 2004-ish and said, hey, do you want to take a big chunk of money right now, and then you're responsible for it for the rest of your life? And I think the city took the buyout. It was about $7 million. Plover and Whiting did not. So what you see in Plover and Whiting on Business 51 was done by the State Department of Transportation on the state's dime, which is still our dime, just comes out of a different pocket. And now we as a city are responsible for the entire cost of our stretch of Business 51 because we took that $7 million back in 2005. I've asked the DOT if they want to buy it back with interest, and they said that's the reaction I got. It was a laugh.
I guess.
So now we're stuck with this bill, and we're looking at a potential price tag of, well, we'll ballpark it at $50 to $60 million for the whole thing. When we look at a rebuild, what are some of the things that you look at for, standards and recommendations change over the years? Minimum widths change over the years. Different practices come into play in regards to moving traffic over the years. What are some of the things that you look at on any road when you're looking to rebuild?
Sure. In the industry itself, to just kind of preface that, changes and upgrades itself. I mean, the way roads were built back when Business 51 was first put in,
Al Capone style when he was driving up to Little
Very much
Bohemia.
different than what we do to now. So as an industry, I mean, it's constantly changing. Now the state gives us some, as well as Federal Highway Administration, they provide a lot of guidance on that. The state DOT has their Facilities Development Manual, their FDM, which is the common reference to as far as the design of roads within the state, and that's the guidebook to which we utilize. And within that, they establish minimum standards, recommended standards, and then in some cases, like maximum standards. For instance, lane widths. A lane widths in certain areas may be required to be a minimum of 10 feet. There may be a recommendation that it be 11. There may be a maximum of 12.
Okay.
And so when we look at those, we also then have to look at any of the new, as far as the evaluate to the ADA, standards, new signalization and technologies that happen, in that realm as far as how a road may function. We look at the stormwater issues that are always created. That's another bigger component that many people don't think about, but the impervious surface needs to be drained off to prevent flooding. And all of this stuff is found within the FDM that we otherwise go through. The FDM, the Facilities Development Manual from WISDOT.
Thank you.
As well as then they have some of the things, very technical things on horizontal curvatures, vertical curves, and those sorts of things. Merges and turning radius to curb radii at an intersection. You name it, you get the pavement markings. Everything is otherwise documented and has a standard.
And I bring this up only to say that there's a pretty decent spectrum of flexibility we can have, but the key component is that we want to make improvements, right? We would be foolish to not take it as an opportunity to make improvements, making it safer, more efficient, whatever the goals happen to be. And in this case, some of the sidewalks are really close to the road, maybe making it safer for pedestrians or trucks. I've heard truck drivers have an issue driving in the outside lanes on Business 51 because their side view mirrors can hit telephone poles.
Right. Oh, absolutely. And within the FDM, one of the nice things they always have there's a realization that there's not a one size fits all. And so based upon the constraints that any community might have, they do offer some flexibility. And so in having that, it says we have flexibility as far as exactly what our lane width would be. Although the recommended width would be 11 feet, 12 feet would be acceptable, 10 feet would be acceptable, but we try to otherwise follow that. And as you mentioned to pedestrians, it's recommended that we maintain a buffer that is between, the back of curb and the sidewalk of 6 feet. That's the recommended. Now, we could alter that, but we do try to follow within their recommendations in basically all those standards until we come to a point in time where we can't fit that in. The constraint becomes too much. It requires us to purchase a property or relocate a business, for instance. It might be the thing where we have to balance out the fact that, okay, we'll compromise a little bit on the distance the sidewalk and curb is and narrow that terrace, that boulevard space there, because that alone may be what's the difference between having to purchase $1 million property and being able to just function with it. And the benefits over a small section may not always be there. So we have some variability there in dealing in coming up with exactly what we want to do. But to your point is that it's a matter of trying to get as much as we can to make it safer, to make it multimodal, to make this. And many of these things are not necessarily, hopefully, what we ourselves would want as a community. Hopefully it is, to make it a better improvement, but also comes to things when we do look at, say, grant funding. And many of the times those are the check boxes per se that we need to check to that to give ourselves the best opportunity at that. Again, in and of itself, not necessary to apply for a grant, but in a competitive nature, we want to show that what more than simply repaving, replacing the pavement, I mean, are we doing to achieve those very goals you stated?
And I wanted to talk a little bit about that too, because we've just got a few minutes left and there's some key points I want to touch on. Is there any design that expressly prohibits us from getting grant money?
There is not, no.
Okay, but like you said, the more boxes we can check on the recommendations and standards, the more likely we are to get those grants. I took the opportunity to serve on one of those LRAP, Local Road Improvement Program review teams to get an idea of how those grant applications get reviewed. And it's pretty interesting. It's really how many boxes can you check? What good does this do for the community? And that's kind of it. So the more boxes we check, the more likely we are to get grants. But there's no design that stops us from getting grants.
That is correct.
And even if we get grants, there's going to be a significant cost to the city because usually they're an 80% match, right? So
correct, yeah. Typical grant is going to be between 50% and 80%.
Okay.
Standard, general approach, the maximum they cap out is 80%.
So even at a $50 million project, we're still looking at least a very minimum of a $10 million city contribution.
Correct.
Taxpayers are going to pay for that regardless.
Yes.
And I want to be very clear on that because I don't want any surprises coming because that's how we pay for things, right? We have taxes. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is how far along are we on, let's say, the Business 51 design? We're moving towards 30%. Does that mean that the project is set and there can't be any changes?
Oh, absolutely not. What the 30% design generally establishes is the general parameters and understanding of what the project is going to be. Typically at that point in time, what we really know is what our real estate needs are going to be. How does it fit within its right of way? Do we need to purchase any, project or
Sure.
purchase any properties along the way? And just the general horizontal and vertical thing as it fits to the FDM. But there's a lot that still needs to be done and a lot of opportunity yet to impose change.
So one of the things that I think people are curious about, I know I am because I suggested this, rather than a 3-lane design through the entire stretch, what about maybe keeping the business districts a little wider? Maybe not hitting the recommended widths, but at least hitting the required widths, a slight property acquisition, which isn't much, keeping it similar to a 4-lane configuration in the south section and the north section, which are predominantly businesses, and narrowing it up there in the middle where it's predominantly residential and arguably we need something to slow people down. Is that a possibility still?
It still is a possibility. Yeah, there's nothing that's so far set in stone that we can't go back and otherwise change. Right now it's just on paper.
Okay.
So that's, anything can be altered and changed.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the impact economically of having to wait for things. Now, our capital budget, you are working on it right now. Did you get that in yet today? We're working on the capital budget right now, and we typically approve those in October. So we may have to go to a referendum in November for our capital budgets, should things fall one way or the other. That isn't crippling. It's more red tape, and it could be force us to go back to the drawing board. But what affects me most is if Scott Beduhn comes to the city of Stevens Point and says, "Hey, Mayor Wiza, I would like to open up a widget factory out in East Park Commerce Center." And I could say, "Well, that's great, Scott, what can we do for you?" And you tell me that, well, you need a rail spur to get your goods in and out, raw materials in, goods out. And you need us to build a road so you can connect your property to Highway HH, for example. Mm-hmm. I can say, okay, great, Scott, we'd love to have you, but since that rail spur is going to be a little over $1 million, and it's quite a bit over $1 million, and that road is going to be over $1 million, I can't give you an answer until we have a chance to take it to the public for a public vote. You, as a developer, are going to say, what's with the hassle? I think I'll go to Plover, or I'll go to Wapaka, or Amherst. And that, I think, is going to be the biggest challenge for us should we need to go to a public referendum on any transportation project over $1 million, because transportation is pretty all-encompassing. Foot traffic, pedestrian traffic is transportation, bicycle accommodations, UTV accommodations, roads, rail spurs, railroads,
It's all
buses,
transportation.
airplanes, the airport, those are all transportation. So from your perspective, what would you need to do differently if you needed to go to a public vote for every project over $1 million, transportation related?
What we'd otherwise, need to do is develop our projects much like we do, but then we would be certainly a pause, as I see it, to go get that approval before we proceed further. However, the biggest challenge then is trying to work with the timelines to which we can, get that, to a vote, as far as then also completing the design and getting it out to bid at an appropriate time to get the pricing that others we're hoping to get. So the challenge is really going to be the timeline of getting those projects done. It'll maybe be a few more steps, but it's really going to be the timeline is going to be the challenge.
Okay, and that's important to note, because there's a lot of exaggerated information. There's a fair amount of misinformation, and quite frankly, there's some wrong information that's circulating out on social media. I want to make sure that anybody who's watching or listening understands that you can contact my office. You can contact Director Beduhn's office. I would encourage you to do so if there are questions that you have, rather than relying on forms of social media or rumors that you hear when you're out socializing, because I don't know that even we fully understand all of the ramifications that could be possible regardless of what happens. But one thing I can assure you is that come August 10th, we're still going to have potholes. Taxes are probably not going down. And we still don't know what the final design of Business 51 is going to look like. It seems like it's very likely right now that it would be some sort of lane reconfiguration, but whether that's the whole stretch or part of the stretch or most of the stretch, or quite frankly, even none of the stretch, still remains to be seen.
That's correct.
One thing that we do know is that the road is not going to get better. We need to do something, and that is, quite frankly, never going to go away. I know this probably didn't answer all of your questions, but I appreciate your time, Scott.
Well, thanks for having me.
For joining us and trying to get some of the different perspectives out there. And I appreciate the fact that you're available by phone or email.
Absolutely.
We don't want anybody knocking on your door in the middle of the night.
That'd be a little strange.
But if you do have questions, please reach out, and we'd be happy to answer those for you. Until next time, this is Director Scott Beduhn, and I am Mayor Mike Wiza, and we've been Talking Point.
For more information about Business 51 or any other road construction project in Stevens Point, contact Mayor Wiza at 715-346-1570 or Director of Public Works Scott Beduhn at 715-346-1564 or visit stevenspoint.com/roads. Talking Point with Mayor Mike Wiza is produced by Stevens Point Community Media. stevenspoint.com/TV